Look at this topographical map. 363 miles of continuous navigable waterway, cutting straight through primeval forests, lethal swamps, and solid mountain bedrock. This is the Erie Canal, the foundational artery of the American Empire. Official history claims it was dug entirely by hand in 1817. Today, excavating a precision trench of this magnitude requires fleets of diesel-powered rotary trenchers, hydraulic excavators, and high-explosive blasting. We are instructed to believe that untrained laborers with iron shovels manually excavated over 11.4 million cubic yards of earth and rock, while flawlessly engineering 83 massive stone locks using unproven experimental underwater cement. Without a mechanized supply chain to feed them, these men had to manually transport over 15 million cubic yards of expanded spoil away from the trench. Yet, the debris simply vanished. It is not a triumph of pioneer grit. It is a mathematical and thermodynamic impossibility. The industrialists of the 19th century did not build this continental matrix. They excavated it. Welcome to TitanMetrics. Let us open the ledger.
Before we proceed into the data, we must establish our baseline parameters. TitanMetrics operates strictly within the boundaries of the established historical record. We do not hypothesize. We do not endorse esoteric folklore or alternative historical theories found on internet forums. The mainstream explanation provided by historians is, on the surface, entirely reasonable. A young nation, desperate to connect the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes, mobilizes its workforce. They open local quarries. They hire thousands of immigrants. They spend 8 years engaging in back-breaking labor to achieve a logistical miracle. It is a beautiful, highly patriotic narrative. Until you subject that narrative to a forensic engineering audit. We treat history as a logistical supply chain, and mathematics does not have an agenda. When we run the physics, the thermodynamics, and the exact volumetric calculations of the official 1817 timeline, the data simply does not compile. We are not questioning the events. We are exposing a critical mathematical glitch. We shift our focus from the architecture of stone to the architecture of the earth itself. We are auditing the Erie Canal and the undeniable physical impossibility of its construction.
In civil engineering, you do not look at the legend on the bronze plaque. You look at the cubic volume. The original, officially documented dimensions of the Erie Canal were highly specific. 40 feet wide at the surface, 28 feet wide at the flat bottom, and exactly 4 feet deep. It stretched continuously for 363 miles from Albany to Buffalo. Let us do the math. To create a precision trench of that exact geometry across that distance, you must excavate and physically remove approximately 11.4 million cubic yards of dense material. I want you to truly visualize the physical reality of that number. 11.4 million cubic yards. Mainstream historians proudly state that the canal was built entirely by human hands and draft animals. Before the digging could even commence, the virgin forest had to be cleared. Official historians proudly point to the invention of a specialized stump puller, a contraption of massive wooden wheels and ropes, allegedly allowing a single man to uproot ancient oak trees. let us apply the laws of mechanical torque. The root system of a mature oak requires hundreds of thousands of foot-pounds of force to successfully extract from compacted soil. A single human biological engine turning a wooden crank in deep mud cannot mathematically generate or sustain the torque required to overcome that tensile resistance without violently shattering the wooden gears. It is a thermodynamic and structural absurdity. But let us grant them the cleared forest. Let us audit the workforce. Let us assume a constant, highly efficient, never-tiring workforce of exactly 10,000 men. Historical records show the numbers were often far lower due to severe disease in the Montezuma swamp, but we will give the official story the absolute benefit of the doubt. They had 8 years to complete the project, finishing in 1825. But remember the geographic reality. This is upstate New York. The ground freezes solid for 4 to 5 months every single year. You cannot dig deeply frozen, rock-hard earth with an 1817 brittle iron shovel.
This strict environmental limitation leaves roughly 200 workable days a year. Over an 8-year timeline, that is 1,600 working days.
If you divide 11.4 million cubic yards by 1,600 days, this army of men had to manually excavate, load, and transport over 7,100 cubic yards of earth and solid rock every single day. Have you ever filled a wheelbarrow with wet, dense clay? A standard 19th century wooden wheelbarrow pushed by a human over uneven, muddy terrain holds about 1/10 of a cubic yard. That translates to 71,000 fully loaded wheelbarrow trips every single day without fail for 8 years.
And that staggering metric only accounts for the dirt. What about the rock? At the infamous Lockport section, the canal had to pass directly through the Niagara Escarpment. This was not soil. This was a solid wall of dense dolomite limestone. A trench 30 feet deep and 2 miles long, carved straight through solid bedrock. Dynamite was not invented by Alfred Nobel until 1867, 50 years too late. Black powder was available, primarily manufactured by DuPont in Delaware. But audit the supply chain logistics. You must transport tens of thousands of pounds of highly unstable, impact-sensitive explosives hundreds of miles into the wilderness. You are packing volatile powder into unsprung wooden carts, dragged by horses over deep ruts, exposed tree roots, and jagged rocks. A single severe jolt, one static spark, and the entire payload violently detonates. The statistical probability of surviving this logistical nightmare with catastrophic continuous explosions is virtually zero. Furthermore, manually drilling blasting holes into dolomite limestone with a star drill and a sledgehammer takes hours just to advance a few inches. The workers were equipped with low-carbon wrought iron tools. When you violently strike dense limestone with early 19th century iron, the iron deforms, blunts, and bends almost instantly. The sheer, brutal man-hours required to fracture that volume of solid limestone using 1820s hand tool metallurgy mathematically exceeds the entire timeline of the canal's construction.
When you dig a massive hole, the dirt does not simply cease to exist. This brings us to a fundamental, unbreakable concept in earthworks engineering: the swell factor. When you excavate compacted earth, clay, or rock, it immediately expands. It loses its geological density and incorporates air. A cubic yard of hard-packed earth in the ground becomes 1.2 to 1.3 cubic yards once it is dug up. Solid rock swells even more violently. Therefore,
Our 11.4 million cubic yards of excavated material instantly becomes over 15 million cubic yards of loose, unmanageable spoil. Mainstream historians will eagerly claim that this 15 million cubic yards of spoil was meticulously repurposed. They state it was used to build the perfectly flat towpaths running parallel to the water, allowing mules to pull the barges. But in earthworks engineering, this introduces a severe physical contradiction. Balancing cut and fill to a zero-sum exactness across 363 miles of wilderness requires highly advanced surveying equipment and heavy compaction rollers. You cannot compress saturated liquid swamp mud into a load-bearing, perfectly graded highway using a wooden shovel and the hooves of a mule. Wet clay without intense mechanical compaction simply yields, collapses, and washes away in the first heavy rain. Yet, look at the earliest archival photographs. Look at the towpaths. They are pristine. They are perfectly flat, manicured, and integrated seamlessly into the surrounding natural landscape. The architectural perfection of the towpaths directly contradicts the physical properties of the excavated spoil. The official narrative casually ignores the law of physical compaction. You cannot build an interstate highway out of swamp mud in 1817. The absence of the structural failure indicates an absence of the excavation.
Let us move from the dirt to the biological engine required to move it. In the early 19th century, infrastructure was allegedly powered entirely by muscles, both human and equine. But muscles do not run on air. They are strict thermodynamic engines, and they require immense calories to output mechanical work. Swinging an iron pickaxe and pushing a loaded wheelbarrow through mud for 12 hours a day requires roughly 5,000 calories per man. If you have 10,000 men on the line, that is 50 million calories required every single day. Then you must audit the draft animals, thousands of horses, mules, and oxen utilized to pull stumps and haul heavy supplies. A working draft horse requires a minimum of 30 pounds of dense feed and forage every single day to survive. Now factor in the hostile environment. Upstate New York in 1817 was not a civilized paved grid. It was primeval, untamed forest and deadly, impassable swamps. There were no railroads. There were no paved highways. There were only deeply rutted, muddy wagon trails that became totally impassable in the rain and completely vanished under the winter snows. How do you successfully supply 50 million calories of human food plus hundreds of thousands of pounds of horse feed into the middle of a malaria-infested swamp every single day for 8 consecutive years? Think about the wagon trains. A standard horse-drawn wooden wagon of the era traversing deep mud could carry a maximum of 1 ton of supplies. But to pull a ton of supplies through thick mud over 50 miles, the horses pulling the wagon must consume a significant portion of the very feed they are transporting. The further the wagon travels into the wilderness, the more the biological engines consume their own payload. This is the unforgiving tyranny of the wagon equation. In a pre-industrial wilderness, long-distance bulk logistics by horse and cart quickly reach a strict mathematical point of diminishing returns. To supply an army of 10,000 men in the deep wilderness, you require an army of supply wagons so massive it would consume the entire agricultural output of the state and choke the few existing mud roads to an absolute standstill. The logistical supply chain required to support the official construction of the Erie Canal simply did not exist. The infrastructure required to build the infrastructure was missing. Let us set the digging aside for a moment and look at the engineering of the water itself. To overcome the 568-foot difference in elevation between the Hudson River and Lake Erie, the canal required 83 massive locks. These were not built with simple poured concrete. They were constructed of giant, precisely cut, multi-ton blocks of limestone and granite. Where did the millions of tons of perfect stone come from? As we documented in our previous audits, the extraction and transportation of megalithic stone blocks is the fatal Achilles heel of the official 19th century timeline. To cut millions of blocks with hand tools requires tens of thousands of highly skilled master masons. This localized labor force simply did not exist in early 19th century America. But the true anomaly lies in the chemistry, the mortar. Standard mortar of the 1820s dissolves in water. You cannot build a canal lock with it. The official narrative claims that an untrained engineer named Canvas White statistically defied the odds and reverse-engineered the lost Roman recipe for hydraulic cement, mortar that cures underwater, just in time to save the canal project. Let us audit the chemical thermodynamics of that claim. This highly complex chemical compound requires burning specific types of limestone at exactly 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit to achieve calcination. The extreme heat bakes the carbon dioxide out of the stone, chemically transforming it. To produce millions of tons of hydraulic cement, you require massive industrial-grade kilns operating 24 hours a day. Where did these kilns come from in the virgin forest? How did they supply the hundreds of thousands of tons of coal and dry timber required to sustain 1,600 degrees for months on end? You cannot execute industrial chemical engineering in a muddy trench without a pre-existing heavy industry footprint. And once a 5-ton block of limestone is cut and sealed, how do you move it from the quarry to the swamp? You cannot put a 5-ton block on a wooden cart in the mud. The wooden axles will violently snap. The very canal they were supposedly building was the only mathematically viable method for transporting that heavy freight. It is a brutal temporal paradox. They needed the finished canal to transport the stone required to build the canal. When we audit the past, we must trust the numbers, not the bronze plaques. The volume of earth moved is mathematically impossible for the time frame. The mechanics of the towpaths violently contradict the physical laws of soil compaction. The caloric deficit makes the supply chain an absolute fiction, and the chemical thermodynamics of the cement contradict the technological reality of 1817. So what is the logical conclusion? If they didn't dig it out of solid rock, what were they doing for 8 years? Look at the data. The math outlines the precise boundaries of a massive, heavily funded recovery operation. The Erie Canal was not a pioneering act of creation. It was a massive, state-sponsored excavation and restoration project. The geographic trench was already there. The foundational stonework and the complex hydraulic lock matrices were already there. We are looking at the remnants of an older, highly advanced continental grid, an infrastructure network that existed long before the current historical timeline acknowledges. Over time, due to systemic geological sedimentation and centuries of natural burial, this massive artery was covered in mud, overgrown with dense forests, and lost to the soil. When the financial elite of the 19th century ventured westward, they didn't anomalously chart a new geometrically perfect route through the mountains. They found the old one. The tens of thousands of laborers weren't digging a new canal through solid dolomite. They were clearing brush. They were dredging centuries of accumulated silt and mud out of a pre-existing, mathematically perfect trench.
They were patching damaged locks, not inventing them from scratch in the wilderness. This perfectly explains how they met the impossible timeline. Clearing soft mud is infinitely faster than blasting dolomite with black powder. They didn't invent the logistical empire. They dug it out of the dirt, claimed it as their own, and patented the past. We have been conditioned to look at these megastructures and marvel at the raw perseverance of the 19th century man. But the real marvel is the sheer, uncompromising audacity of the institutional cover-up. The greatest trick the robber barons ever pulled wasn't building the modern world. It was convincing us that they didn't just find it. The math does not lie. The official narrative is a mathematical glitch. Keep calculating. Subscribe to TitanMetrics. The ledger remains open.